Okay, if anybody does not see a slide that says Phoenix LiveView, shout it right now. Perfect. Okay, we are here to talk about Phoenix LiveView. My name is Todd Resudek. I am an Elixir engineer at a company called SimpleBet, and I'm a member of the Hex core team. And that's my Twitter handle, super simple with no vowels. So maybe just a little background into my LiveView experience. So after the Elixir Conf where Chris introduced LiveView, I made this mirror for my house, this smart mirror for my house. And I decided to make all these things into LiveViews. So previously I'd been using Phoenix channels to do this, and it was working fine, but I switched it out to use LiveViews. And this was like, at the 0.1 phase, and worked out pretty well. But at SimpleBet, so I've been there for the last year and a half, we have actually been building out all of our front-end interfaces, with the exception of our mobile interface, using LiveView. So it's everything from internal tools to customer-facing tools and the whole schmear. So we don't really have any front-end engineers at SimpleBet. We have some mobile engineers that do some front-end work, but most of the front-end stuff is done by Elixir engineers, which I've been pretty happy with. So yeah, Phoenix LiveView, this is the definition from the page. It provides a rich real-time user experiences with server rendered HTML. So hopefully everybody's seen LiveView before. Has anybody not seen LiveView in action before? Just raise your hand. Okay, I didn't see anybody. All right, well, if anybody hasn't seen LiveView before, we're going to show you some today. So what are the good use cases for this? And this is according to the documentation. So interaction, so handling of user interaction and inputs, buttons, forms, such as validation, dynamic forms, autocompletes, events. So events and updates pushed by the server, such as notifications, dashboards, etc., and navigation. So page and data navigation, such as navigating between pages, paginations, etc. And so yeah, I guess interaction is sort of like events. So this is a way of like binding or listening for events and sending that back down to the server and say, hey, the user clicked on here, do something, and events pushing that back up to the LiveView, or if something changes in the database, pushing that into the LiveView so that the user doesn't have to refresh. And the navigation is, basically, there's APIs built in for navigation using the push state so that it can kind of act and function like an SPA without having to bring in any other frameworks. All right. Any questions so far? Okay. I'll just be listening for Josh. So a LiveView lifecycle. So one thing that's super nice about LiveView, as for me, who hasn't done modern JavaScript in quite a long time, is I feel like I really got left behind by was React had like Redux and Flux and Flow and all these different patterns, I guess, for dealing with state and events and the whole schmear. And looking at a LiveView, you look at the callbacks that you can define in there, it looks a lot like a gen server. So for me, I was like, wow, okay, this makes sense to me. I'm super comfortable with these patterns. So in a LiveView, so this is a LiveView proper, it has a mount 3, which is the thing that gets called first, then an optional handle params callback, which just takes, if you pass in any params like through the URL, for instance, it can parse those out. And then the render. So render is your embedded template, your HTML template. Think of it that way. And then handle event and handle info. And those are callbacks just like you would have on a gen server. So you can, those LiveView events can send messages, and you can handle the events or handle info. So I'll get into that in a little bit more detail, show you an example of it. but yeah, just I guess the important thing to notice is mount is only called once, and then you go to handle params, render, then the handle event, handle info callbacks, do things, and then it goes back to handle params and render. And handle params is optional, so it could actually just go back and forth between render and the handle info and handle events. So this is a not comprehensive list of event bindings that Phoenix supports, or Phoenix LiveView supports. There's a few more, but these are the ones that I've used the most often and I think are the most useful. So I think other libraries, JavaScript libraries, think of like Vue, for instance, have these special attributes, which are like, in this case, they're prefaced with phx dash. And so you put these into your HTML template, and phx dash is a Phoenix specific or a LiveView specific handler. And so you can see some things that are familiar there. Phoenix click is just like a regular JavaScript on click. Phoenix blur, just like on blur or on focus, key down. For forms, you've got change and submit. So you can see where change would be good for validations, for instance, and then submit, would go to a handle event that would process the form. So I'll go back up to the top one. Params is Phoenix value dash wildcard. And so anytime you want to, let's say you put a Phoenix click on something, you want to pass in an attribute. Think of it maybe like a data attribute, which is sort of like it can just be anything, but I want you to take some data and push it back into the callback. So Phoenix value, you could do like Phoenix value dash user ID or something like that. And then it would come into the handle params as the user ID field. And then the last one is phx hook. And that's for JavaScript interop. So phx hook just takes a JavaScript function. And it's sort of saying like, I'm going to do some interaction, and LiveView is pretty much just going to like pass this down the line to JavaScript. It doesn't really, there's no callbacks on the other end of a phx hook. It's just a JavaScript function. So it's pure JavaScript that it's going to there. All right. Any questions yet?
There have been none. I will be rude.
Okay. I just feel like this is such complicated stuff. I'm surprised, but I shouldn't be. Everybody's so smart. All right. So next phase is Phoenix Live components. So components are a mechanism to compartmentalize state, markup, and events in LiveView. And so this is kind of big. It seems like it's simple, but it's kind of big. So a live component can be anything from a static template that you just want to reuse, all the way up to something that manages its own state and it manages its own events and is sort of like more or less autonomous to the LiveView or to any of the components that are around it. And so components run inside a LiveView process, but they can have their own state and event handling, like I said. So give you an idea of what this looks like. So a LiveView component cannot exist outside of a parent LiveView. There always has to be a parent of a component that is a LiveView somewhere in the chain. And one of the reasons is the LiveView proper actually is the one that gets the PID, and all of the live components that are children of that live component or of that LiveView all use that same PID. So they're all communicating on the same ID and inside the same process. And so the proper LiveView sort of acts like a traffic cop, because if you're sending messages, you can't send a message directly to a live component from another live component. And I guess if you have a mental model for this, if you think about all these abstract things existing on the same process, there has to be some authority figure, I guess. In this case, it's a LiveView. So here's a really contrived, like simple example of what the code might look like. So this is the So you see this says like use Phoenix Live View. So that is a proper live view. And it has this render one function in it or callback in it. And what this is doing is rendering a template. Now you could actually use the squiggly L sigil and just put the template code right into here. And that's just a matter of personal preference, whether you want to do it that way or not. But just for the sake of having a small screenshot, I put it into this template file, which is, in this case, it says index.html, but it's actually index.html.leex, which is the extension for live views. And so this is that index file. And notice it just has a little bit of HTML wrapper around it, and then it immediately invokes this live component call. And so this is kind of like the same. This is the way of rendering a live component inside of a live views template, I guess. And so if you had 10 of these, you might have 10 calls to live component, all in the same like HTML template. And so you give that the socket, you tell it the module that the live component, where the live component is defined, and then some optional arguments. So if you want to pass data down into the live component, you do that as a third argument. And it is optional in most cases. You don't have to pass anything down into it if you don't want to. And then, so this is the live component itself. So use Phoenix live component, and this also has a render. And then you can see here the squiggly L, tilde L sigil, and then at title. So in this case, title is some title, and that automatically gets put into these assigns. And so you get access to it as at title. And in the same, you would have at ID in this live component. And so a live component's life cycle, the callbacks are a little bit different. There's actually fewer components, but these are the main ones. So mount, update, and render. So mount is just like the parent live view. In this case, it's only takes one argument, which is the socket. Update, which is always called anytime the live component changes or its parent live view changes, update is called. And takes two arguments. First one is assigns, the second one is the socket, and then finally render. And I guess one thing to notice here is, I should probably point out, is all of these callbacks, you're always passing around a socket. So almost all of them take a socket as one of its arguments in, and almost all of them expect to have the socket returned from the callback. All right, so that was simple. Let me show an example of, let me try to show an example of some code here. It's a good time to jump in if anybody has anything
Yeah,
to say.
I was just gonna mention, you don't even have to have a question. If you just want to hear me interrupt Todd, you can click the pick up your hand button and I'll do it. Like if it just entertains you.
Or somebody just wants to kibitz for a
Oh,
second.
I have
get
one
my
thing to
code set
kibitz
up.
on. I have one thing to
Okay.
kibitz on, which is I learned on a recent LiveView project that I'm much happier when my render is, and this is on a surface component, but I assume it's the same, right? My render is an inline function rather than a separate template file, because it turns out hot patching is a superpower. And if you really need to see, oh, well, how is this going to work on production data? You can just go hot patch staging or whatever and not wait for a build. And it's really hard to do that if you have a separate template.
Okay. I mean, everybody's entitled to their own opinion.
I would rather have the template be separate, but I don't know how to solve the hot patching issue. And it turns out for this project, that was very valuable.
Okay. That's a good question. Or a good point, I guess. I'm sure there's some workaround for it. And to
I would
be
rather
fair,
work on a project that doesn't ever need me to do any hot patching to move forward.
better yet, just not doing anything to move forward. Be ideal. All right. Sorry here, I'm getting my demonstration together. Hi, Sandy. Hi, Todd.
Hey, sorry, looking for my unmute.
It's okay.
He really nails the voices.
I got them all down. For anybody that joined late, I was explaining that this is sort of meant to be interactive. So if you have experience in LiveView, chime in, just hit the raise hand button in the Zoom reactions, I think it is. And then Josh will call on you. Or if you just have like a comment or whatever, if something's not clear, just do that. So, okay, so here's a LiveView in action. Okay, so this is called simple, and you'll just see this counter will go up. And I want to show you the code. If this code is not large enough, let me know and I can try to increase the size of it. Oh, and Josh, I was going to say, there are times when I put things directly into the render, and there's times when I use a template. It kind of depends on how long the code, like how much embedded code there is in there. Or if I'm working with somebody that's really adamant about keeping them in separate files. So, that's not the one I wanted. Okay, so this is, here we go. All right, so hopefully you've been seeing this thing count up. And so I want to show you the real life code that's actually running this. So this is the outer layer, the live view. So this is the parent. You see its mount callback. And in this case, it sends itself a message every 3 seconds to do a counter update. The render, which is, let me pull up the file. Simple. So, and this is the template that it's rendering. Let me just open that full template, simple components. Okay. So this is what it is. It's a H1 tag that has the counter in it. And go back to the live view. And this handle info, this just handles this message that it's sending itself to counter update. And what it does is replies with this no reply, and then reassigns counter in the socket. So counter, you'll see is assigned 0 here. And after every time that is called, so every 3 seconds, it updates the counter to its value +1 with this no reply. And this is what's making this H1 change. So you're getting the socket updated here. So socket.assigns is actually updated here. And then the live component, simple. Yeah, so the simple, sorry, this passes counter down from the socket assigns, and then this is spitting it out. So that's like a somewhat trivial example, but no JavaScript involved. So, I mean, that's good. That's a good day for anytime you don't need JavaScript. Did I hear a round of applause?
Woo!
Okay, thank you. All right, so show another example here. So events up. So that was the most trivial example where we have the live view that's changing the state, pushing the state down into the live view component, and the live view component essentially doesn't do anything other than re-render. It doesn't send any messages back or anything. So events up live. Okay, so this one, every time we click the button, something happens. And so if you look here at these outputs, to give you a little bit more insight into the into the life cycle that I was trying to explain before. So every time I push this, you'll see the stateless component is calling mount and the stateless component is calling update. And so we start at the top, same thing here. We've got the mount, we assign the counter, we've got the template, and then we've got this handle event, which is the counter update. Now, hold on to that. And I'll show you what this does. So the template is just a plus button. Let me see if I can pull that up. Event up, LEX. Okay. Events up. Sorry, let me get the events up component. Here we go. Okay, so yeah, it mounts. It just has the socket. Nothing is changed. Nothing is reassigned on that. Update. So this update and in live components, if you were to leave this update off, it would automatically do this same thing. So it assigns all of the assigns to the socket. In this case, I added it explicitly, A, to just show it as part of the life cycle, and then B, so I could put this inspect in there. And then obviously there are times when your update will take the assigns and it may only assign a few of them, or it may take like 2 of the assigns, like, oh, it got assigns minutes and assigns seconds, and then it turns that into, a string that shows minutes colon seconds or something like that, and mutates the assigns before it spits them back out to the LiveView component. And yeah, here's the render. So showing that. And so here's one of the events, the Phoenix click event. And it just gets this counter update.
Mackenzie has a question.
Yes, Mackenzie.
It's not actually specific to the part that you're talking about right now. It was just, I was noticing all the like @impl true decorations, and I don't know what that's for. Would you mind explaining it?
Sorry, you cut out a little bit. I think
The behavior at impulse.
Oh, at impulse, true. Okay, yeah, that is just me being pedantic. So this is, so what that says is these are implementing callbacks that are defined. And so so I'm using live component. So it's theoretically, this is Phoenix. It's implementing the mount 1 callback that is actually defined in Phoenix live component. And so this is just being.
It's to tell the compiler, hey, you know how I told you I was a live component behavior? This is me saying for sure I'm implementing this thing that live component behaviors have to implement.
Okay,
Or don't even have to implement, they can implement.
Could,
For instance, update doesn't have to be implemented. Or if I defined an update 3 here, which is something that I use internally, I could do that, and then it wouldn't be an impl true. And so impl true is just a shorthand way of saying it's implementing Phoenix live component. I don't know if anybody has a preference, if you'd rather see it this way.
Sometimes if you want to implement multiple behaviors, it makes sense to, or even Elixir will explicitly tell which one you want to implement.
Oh, right. Yeah. So if you were using or implementing behaviors from 2 different modules and they both had the same name, like update, for instance, or they both had the same function, the same name and same arity, then yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for adding that. But yeah, it's not necessary to like make any of this code run. So sorry. So the Phoenix click, this is the event. So this is what's doing the magic here. It says counter update, and counter update. What that does is sends out a message to the parent LiveView, and it's caught here in the handle event. So any of these events that I talked about before, that you can define these PHX dash things like PHX blur or PHX change or whatever. Those are all caught by handle event callbacks in in this case, it's in the parent live view. So this, every time you click the button, it gets a message and tells it, okay, increment the counter by 1. So a little bit more complicated than the last one, but not much. And so this is a case where, so the first one we had the case where the parent live view just tells the live component what to show, and the live component was pretty dumb. In this case, it's kind of the same thing, except for we have this event that bubbles up to the parent live view that then sends a message back down again. All right. So this is the next logical iteration to that, which is up and down. And so starting at this live view, again, nothing too fancy here. You'll see the handle events, and they're sort of attached to these plus buttons. Let me see. And we've got, again, the mount, and in this case, the update is, we've got 2 updates. So one of them is this generic one, which is the one that's called in the beginning of the life cycle. So it goes from mount to this update to this render. And then we've got counter update. So that's the handle event that I showed briefly in the live view. We've got the Phoenix value dash target, which I talked about. So in this case, target is a wildcard. So it's going to tell that event, it's going to give that event a param called target, which is its target. And go back to this real quick, and you'll see that in here. So you get a counter update and then target. And let me pull up the template that does this.
Francisco has a question.
Francisco, go ahead.
Thank you. Todd, you have that function, the render function has a parameter saying assigned, but I don't see you using assigns into the function. So what happened there?
Great question. So this is, and I should probably look into this more. This sigil requires something to be called assigns. Like if I were to underscore this, the compiler would throw an error that it was expecting something to be assigned and it wasn't. And I could actually do assigns equals here, and the compiler would be like, okay, I guess I'm getting my assigns from there instead. But in this case, putting it here, and so all of these ats in this render are actually, I guess it probably is a macro or some
It's
sort
a
of
macro that essentially says, look in assigns for the thing with this key.
Yeah, so I guess it would be like assigns.counter. It probably does some more special, like it might cast things or it may handle nil properties better than just saying assigns.counter. But they're more or less synonymous.
Gotcha, thank you.
Excellent question. And so I guess the last part is this is the LiveView template. And so you see this component, this events up and down component is the same component being reused. So as I promised, reusable components. They get a separate ID and a separate target. So they both start at 0. If I were to, let's say, start this one at 2. So you can see it change there. And so what's happening is when I click on this button, this first one,
Mike Z has a question.
Okay, Mike Z from Philly.
Yeah, sorry, I don't really mean to interrupt you in the middle of
I mean to interrupt him. Give me the opportunities, people.
I had a question. So like when you have a component and you're defining things like you have the attribute counter there, is there any way with like vanilla LiveView to express that like this is a component, and to use this component you're required to pass in like a title and a background color, and have that somehow enforced like at compile time, maybe with dialyzer or something?
I don't know of any way to do it with plain LiveView, but as
Yeah.
Josh, I'm sure, can point out, there's a great library called Surface. And one of the things that it does really well, and I'll show a little bit of Surface today, is exactly that, is just essentially say, here are the assigns basically I expect to get, or the properties I expect to get from you. Here are the data types that I'm expecting them to be. I'm either requiring them to be present or I'm not, and I can give them a default value as well.
Okay, I'm aware of Surface. I haven't gotten too deep into it yet.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah, it's definitely, I'll get to that in a second, but yeah,
Okay.
it's definitely, if you really want to, and I don't know, is that something, Mike, maybe, is that a pattern that's maybe more familiar in some of the JavaScript community, to have a little bit more like protection, I guess? I assume
know.
Surface is, okay. All right,
I
I'm
mean,
not a JavaScript expert.
the problem in the JavaScript community tends to be there are no layers anywhere that require any rigor. And so you find out when stuff's broken in production in the console.
Okay,
So it's very nice to have this in the same way that it's nice to have TypeScript on a React project.
cool. Yeah, Surface is I don't want to spoil it. I'm going to get to Surface. So great question, Mike. And I imagine the people behind Surface probably asked themselves that same question a few times and then decided to actually build it. So going back to this, so the target, remember we had the Phoenix click that said handle counter or counter up or whatever it's called, counter update. And then it passes in this Phoenix value target. And then this grabs that target and says, oh, okay, that's essentially the ID of the thing that I want to increment. And so you see these IDs here. So this counter A says target this component here when you increment, and then this one, same thing, in reverse. And so this is, I guess the pattern here is you've got two components that are siblings. Each case, when you click them, they send a message up to their parent. So this parent LiveView here, who is the operator, telling it where the messages go. And then in this case, it uses send update. So send update is a special function that exists in live components, which says, I want to target this component. So it's this module with this specific ID, and it only works this way. So you have to tell it what component it is, and what ID it has, so that it knows exactly where to send that message to. And so anytime you have a stateful component, so a component that is managing any of its own state, you need to give it an ID. And that's how the parent process sort of organizes who's in charge of what state internally. So click this a few times and you can kind of see that happening. So is that cool? Does anybody think that's cool?
Mortada has a question. I don't know if he was raising his hand to say it was cool. I doubt it.
Yeah, actually, I just want to say about the parent. I have a question. Is it an actual process between the parent and the component, or it's a same process but it's logically organized this way? Because I noticed when we try to send a message to a component, the parent will receive the message, not the component itself. For example, the handle info, it will be on the parent.
That's correct. Yes, that's so. There's one way to get around that, but I'll show you that in a second. But yeah, all of the components and the LiveView that are in this tree, if you think of them like a tree with a parent and all of its siblings and progeny after that, are all on the same PID. So it's always going to be in the same process. So yeah, for what I've shown so far, they're all in the same process, and the parent is having to act as sort of the traffic cop of making sure the right person gets the right message. But there is a way, let me see. So this next one, good segue to event self. So part of this is just how you want to organize your code, how your team wants to organize your code, or how you want to reuse code, where you want to put these things. But so far we've had the parent LiveView sort of handling all the callbacks and managing all the state, which is fine if it's somewhat trivial, or if your team decides on that project that they would rather go into 1,000 line file and find the right callback rather than to look in 20, 50 line files to find the right callback. But there is a way. Here we go. But there is a way for the live component to manage its own state. So we're back to the counter here, but it is a little bit different. So we've got this live view, and there's nothing out of the ordinary here. And did I do this right? Yes, I did. Okay. So we've got the live component preload. It's not doing anything. Mount is not doing anything. Update, in this case, is doing its default behavior. And then we get to the template. So Phoenix click does a counter update. And we've got, in this case, it says Phoenix target. So Phoenix target is your way of saying, don't go to my parent process. In this case, go to myself. So this is Chris McCourt's at myself. I don't know why it's not called self or this, but he calls it myself.
I can imagine why it's not this, just from a, who wants this?
Who wants this? Yeah, so at myself is assigned on all LiveView components by default. So it's magic, it exists at all times. And so if you want to submit a form back to that component, instead of always having it handled by its parent LiveView, this is the way to do it. So Phoenix target is myself. And so what that does is says, okay, counter update. Instead of going to my parent LiveView, I actually first want to look for the callback inside of the same, inside of this component. And so in this case, it finds it and it increases the counter. And so it's state, so the counter value in this case exists in the, I guess, think of it inside the boundaries of this one component. So if I have 10 of these components that exist on a page, so let me uncomment this line. Hopefully this works. Okay, so now I've got 2 of these and they're behaving independently. So it's the same component and both are getting at counter. And so the reason that's possible is, in this case, I don't need this handle, I don't think. God, I hope this works. Okay. So, so yeah, in this case, the parent LiveView is more or less done. It all it does is essentially creates this template and says, okay, put a bunch of components in there. And it doesn't really know anything other than that. And so the components are self-contained. And so when you click the button inside the component, it knows its own state, like its particular instance of the counter, and it can increase that by itself. So I think that kind of was going back to your question. I think you were asking about, does it have to go up to the parent LiveView? And it really doesn't. And so this, you can see where this could be really convenient if you're sharing components on a project or like along a lot of different pages or parts of a project. You can really make something that's very independent, I guess, and sort of self-contained, and just say, here, throw this in. And all you have to do is call this module and you'll have a counter wherever you want it. You don't have to tell it anything else. All right, are we good? Okay. All right, and next I want to talk about a little bit about JavaScript interrupt. Somebody raise your hand if you are a JavaScript developer or you were a JavaScript developer at some point. Josh, you can tell me how many people admit to that.
We have 3.
3, okay, that's good. Recovering JavaScript developers.
I would
wanna
assume
say
the
that.
number's more like 8 or 10, but there's some shame involved.
Okay. I mean, for me, I've just come to accept the fact that I fell way behind in JavaScript. So if I sound like I'm making fun of JavaScript, it's just because I'm too dumb to figure it out. All right, so we've got the live view. So this one, super trivial, just renders this one template. And this is super trivial, renders this live component. And so this live component,
I'm not sure. We've got 3 hands up. I'm not sure if we're still announcing the JavaScript developerness or if there are questions now. I realize that this has been overloaded.
okay.
It's possible
Yeah.
there are questions. Ignacio or Greg, do either of you have a question? If so, speak up. First one wins.
No question. Just hands timing out.
All right. Cool. So, so this is the first example and last example of using this Phoenix hook. And so what this does is Phoenix hook calls counter update. So let's say you are more comfortable using JavaScript than you are using Elixir, or probably the more reasonable use case for the Phoenix hook is if you want to do something that's a bit more complicated than what LiveView offers. This is a great way to start interacting with actual JavaScript. And so you see we're counting sheep now. And what that does, so when you register, sorry, I call this Phoenix counter update. So in my app.js file, I just put it in here. It could go anywhere in your JS pipeline, I suppose. I register this hook called, so in the hooks object, it's called counter update. And that's what this is calling here. And so what this does is waits till it's mounted, adds an event listener to the click. So clicking that does something. And then don't laugh at me, but let's, the reason I am using a Phoenix hook here instead of using LiveView is I wanted to do this DOM navigation, let's say. And so I'm looking for the closest div and then looking or creating it or looking for the unordered list and then creating a new list item. And then I am going to pick a random number and then based on, there we go. If the number came back as 22, it's going to render a unicorn. Otherwise, it's going to render sheep. And so I can't do this in LiveView, or I don't know how to do this in LiveView, but I do know how to do it in JavaScript. So instead of bashing my head against the keyboard all day, trying to figure out how to make random unicorns, I just wrote this JavaScript function and used the PHX hook binding to make that work. So anybody like unicorns? Raise your hand. Okay. And so if you're a more creative JavaScript person, I'm sure you could find a far less trivial reason to use PHX hook than this. But I did want to show it just because I think it is powerful. It's sort of, it means it doesn't lock you into the LiveView world. You have access to the JavaScript world anytime you want it through that. So, and then more examples. I'll show this more complex example here, which kind of uses a few of the different features that we've looked at so far. So this is a complex live view And so this is the parent, and assigns a couple of default values here. So selected date and whether the calendar should be opened or not, like if you want to collapse it. And so this is a LiveView component, and you can see you can click on calendar and pick the dates. And in this case, let's say I want to make a to-do list for a specific date. So let me go to July 8th. Okay, so let's add another to-do list. So brush teeth. Okay, great. And then something that's a little less critical, which is shower. And then maybe something that's important, go to work, but not critical, and so on and so forth. And then maybe I don't want to go to work that day. Okay, so this is all LiveView stuff that's happening here, more or less. And you can see I've got two components here, date picker and the to do. And I guess one thing to look at is, see how I switched dates here, and then now the to-do list is going to that separate date. So the two are kind of interacting with each other. And complex, or let's look at date picker. So yeah, let's look at the date picker component. Just, I don't know what to say about this, just sloppy HTML stuff. And you'll see like this PHX value month and PHX click, a lot of different stuff, a lot of different callbacks and handlers registered there. And update, so like when we change the month, click this arrow, it hits this, and then it figures out, okay, what month was I in? And now I go figure out on the calendar what the previous month was supposed to be. Or if I change the date, it's going to change the day on here, and so on and so forth. So see all these helpers for that. So this is like, I guess like a date picker could be defined. Normally I'm used to seeing these things built in JavaScript, and so there'd be a lot of JavaScript to do this stuff. But you can see I like built a pretty, I don't know, decent, what I think is a pretty decent UI component, all essentially in Elixir here. So does anybody think that that's cool or admirable in any way? Okay.
I think it's admirable. I think admirable is great.
Okay, great. All right. I'm pretty proud of myself for it because I am not a front-end developer. And so for me to be able to build something like this that does all this stuff and not have to leave Elixir, it really makes me feel good about myself in a way that I otherwise don't normally feel good about myself. All right. So let's look at the to-do item. And so this one uses hooks, and that's to build these DOM elements, build and elements. So again, it's sort of a, whatever tool fits the job for these. So one is a lot of Elixir, and the other one mostly relies on JavaScript. And but what's nice about this is when I switch the selected date here, that state is automatically passed down into my to-do list. So my to-do list knows that it's supposed to be changing to its state for May 3rd in this case. And so that all kind of happens naturally just by having them both pull the same assigns from their parent. And I guess I'll show the JavaScript hooks for this, but there's really nothing particularly fancy about these. It's more DOM manipulation stuff. Same thing here. So cool. Let me show one more example, I guess. So this is a real world example, not contrived example for a product that I am working on that's built in Nerves. And so if you look at, I've got two components here. I've got this one that's the graph and one that's this table. And so if you look at these, this is what this is doing is checking my network for two different properties, packet loss and its ping time, and just to essentially like measure the quality of the network. And then if the network gets too bad, it will warn me. And then if it goes down to 0, then it will automatically restart my router for me. But these are both done in LiveView. So like two totally different ways of showing data in LiveView. And every 90 seconds, it makes a ping. So probably see a new one come up here pretty soon here. But this chart up here is all just done with SVGs. So it's just an HTML. It's just literally a sigil L render function that does all this stuff. And so this poly line is the graph. Just got tons and tons and tons of points on it. But that's all done in LiveView. And so if anybody knows SVG, you can see these are all XY pairs. And so what it does is when it gets its next measurement, it calculates its XY pair and then just tacks it onto the end of this list. And then that list is in the assigns for the graph. So this is the packet loss graph, which is luckily stays at a consistent 0. But you'll see my network quality goes up and down between 0 and every once in a while up to 100 milliseconds, but usually stays pretty below 20 or 30.
I'm not sure if there's a question. I see a hand up, but I don't see it attached to a person. Oh, Mike Z
wow.
has his hand up. Never mind. Now I see it.
I'm gonna ask this now just because I feel like the screen is related. And you may not have an answer, but I'll just ask. So we for LiveView, I am interested in getting more familiar with how to simulate a poor mobile connection experience. I'm aware that like they have that simulate latency thing built into the front end client, but I'm more looking for like ways to like stress test my LiveView app against mobile connections and like WebSocket jitter, just to kind of like understand like how my system reacts. And this is kind of related to like, I'm also interested in like, how do I stress test my LiveView apps in general? But I don't know if you or anybody else who's been doing like live production deployments with LiveView has ever gotten into any like tooling around those concepts. I would love to hear some notes if you do, or pointers in the right direction.
I don't have a specific answer. Were you asking this like recently on maybe on Twitter, or was that somebody else, Mike?
It wasn't me. It could have been somebody from my team. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Somebody asked something like this recently, and two people came up with two different answers, which I felt like were good answers, or at least they seemed very confident they were good answers. It might have been in the nerves channel, but it was very similarly related, which is I use cellular data and I want to test all these different, conditions under which it happens. So I'm going to make myself a note.
Okay.
Z, and if I can find that thread, I'll point you to it.
Also,
that'd be great.
check Chris McCord's tweet stream from the past week. This has come up.
Okay.
Yeah, he had a really good thing for the Mac. What platform are you on?
I have Mac right now. I have Linux too, but I'm on a Mac right now.
Yeah, he actually had a really good way of slowing it down, which you'll like.
Okay, cool. I'll look into that. Yeah, I know we have people on our team who are not very satisfied with the jitter. I don't even know what this is, but like WebSocket jitter. It's like a very low level like networky thing, but like the front end JavaScript client for LiveView specifically, I don't think resolves it that well right now. I don't know, and I'm just looking to better understand how it works because we have a lot of long-lived clients. Yeah,
Okay.
Just curious.
Yeah, I think Josh, I saw that. That's the thread I saw on Twitter was from Chris. But I felt like there was two different solutions there. And so nevertheless, I'll look for it and I'll ping you on it, Mike Z. Or you can probably try to find it, but I'm gonna find
Awesome.
it anyway, unless you tell me first that you already found
Okay,
it.
I'll look for it while we're
Put it in
talking.
the chat. I put it in the chat.
Okay. Oh, you found it? Is that you, Ben?
Yeah, I put it in the chat here.
The wisdom
Awesome,
of
thank you.
crowds.
All right. Yeah. Cool. I'm glad to see we're all following the same people on Twitter. Okay, let's go back to my presentation here. I'm going to skip out of some of this. JS interrupt. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to show was Surface UI. So we alluded to it a little bit before. And so this is from the site. I'm just going to read it verbatim out of respect. So built on top of Phoenix LiveView and its new live component, Surface leverages the amazing Phoenix framework to provide a fast and productive solution to modern web applications. All right, that sounded a lot worse than I remembered. But so Surface UI is a library that's built by Marcellus from DashFit. And at first I was like, I don't really get it. Like, I don't really understand why I need it. Live components seem pretty simple, but it does have a few features that I've already mentioned that do make it pretty cool. It's got a great Lexer. And so it can like tell you if you forgot to set something. And formatter is great on it. So it's a pretty nice little cherry on top of the live component system. So we're currently building an application at Simplebed that's purely using Surface, which is maybe a horrible idea if your company's going to depend on it, because it's a really young library. And so the API is likely to change or break. But if you have something kind of small, I guess, or something that you don't mind maintaining a little bit over the next few months while things change or settle in, I've enjoyed working with it so far. So let me see. So yeah, here's back to the counter example. And I just wanted to show you everybody what the Surface templates look like. Or yeah. Okay. So the LiveView, so it uses a sigil H here. And so this is how you call a component. So it uses this, I think this syntax is a little bit more common in the JavaScript world, or the, if you've used .NET or Cold Fusion, if you're old enough. Yes,
I've used Cold Fusion.
There you go. So it looks like tags everywhere, but with camel case or Pascal case, I guess. And so this is essentially like the same thing as calling live component, or analogous, I guess, to calling live component. And so you've got like counter equals 0, and then you can also pass in, like if you want interpolated values, you use these double mustaches to do that. And so this is what it's coming down to in calling event surface. This is the live component for that, and this is the template. And then you can also use, as long as the component and the template uses are called the same name, you could make a file called with a .sface extension on it, in that would automatically render. So you could get rid of this render function and then just put this into the sface file.
We call that the Safaki file.
Sufaki file.
Getting there.
Yeah. So and then this is a really small example, but it uses props and data. So data would be, so props are passed in, and this is, I think I talked about this a little bit. So in this case, it's saying it takes a property. So it's going to expect a property passed in called counter that is an integer. And in this case, it's required. And so if I didn't include it, like I said, the compiler would bark at me and say, you're missing a required property called counter in, XYZ module. And so, and then if you want to manage internal state, those are just under the data, I guess, keyword. And so this would be stuff that's internal to the component map default. So it would look like this. And so this is stuff that you want to use internally, but don't expect it to be passed in. And so none of the layers above it will know about it. And yeah, so I guess that's a little bit into Surface. I don't want to go too far into it, but I wanted everybody to know that it's there and it's worth checking out. All right, any questions? I know we did questions already. Anybody have any ideas sparked from this? Things that you're like, hey, I really wanted to do that. Okay, I'm gonna kick it back over to you, Josh.
Well, Francisco has a question.
Yeah. Todd, in my work, we use GraphQL, and I am just learning GraphQL for the 2 or 3 weeks before ago. So how LiveView and GraphQL are combined, or is possible to combine it? Or what do you think about the combination between GraphQL and LiveView?
Yeah, I don't think they ever, I'm trying to think if they would ever actually touch each other.
I know a way.
Okay, Josh.
All right, so we have not LiveView presently, but we have some front end like marketing sites for these white label subdomains that people get when they buy an add-on for one of our products. And they are very thin Phoenix applications that are a GraphQL client that talk to our GraphQL backend that is another application running elsewhere. And so they're just like a client, but they're server rendered client. I could envision a server rendered client using LiveView to push updates that did subscriptions. Now, why would you do this instead of JavaScript? It would be solely for the server rendered part of it, which is why we do that in those. But I could imagine, though I have not done it and really don't see myself doing it, but I could imagine doing that, doing GraphQL subscriptions that you then shoved up with LiveView because you had that architecture. It's the only, I've thought about this because I've wanted to know, hey, could they ever cross paths? And that's the only one I ever came up with.
Okay, thank you.
Mortada has a question.
Not a question, but regarding the absent setup for the GraphQL, they have some documentation of how to use it with the there is some example of how to use the GraphQL endpoint within controller, which is similar to how you can use it with LiveView, for example. It's just a server, you pass it a query, and you'll get the result. So you can use it without using any channels and everything. Just a query and the query and the what's called the schema module. So you can use it without any issues there.
Okay.
Yeah, so live views are controllers. And so, yeah, I guess that's a great explanation of it, Mortada. So.
Yeah, we have on the GraphQL front, we like to take advantage of like module, just module tags for specifying queries. There's a thing you can do. So maybe that's interesting, and that's a controller level thing too. I don't know. At this point, I'm rambling. All right, are there any other questions? It has been, okay, yes, Mike has another question or comment. Questions or comments.
This is I'll throw this out there. I don't know. One of the challenges we've run into recently with our LiveView page is that when viewed on like mobile Safari, so like a phone, Safari, depending on the type of form widget, will have its own kind of UI. So like if you have a select on a form, and like it'll present the wheel type selection. But like we try to listen to on change for that value to like kind of like update like a kind of like a wizard style thing where you're depending on your choice of selection 1 will impact the choices available in selection 2, and that didn't really work very well. And we kind of have some workarounds for like blurring, but it's challenging because it's like depending on if the user changes how the user changes focus by like how they touch the screen, the on change doesn't get fired. Anyway, that's a very detailed question. I'll throw it out there. If anybody has worked on that type of issue before, I would love to hear about it.
Is the on change attached to the select, or is it attached to the form?
It's attached to the form, and the challenge is that like when like LiveView has this rule where it won't, like if the element is in focus, it won't change it like underneath it won't change it underneath of it, like, you know. So like if you had a type, like if you had a text field, like an input field that you were typing into, and the form was changing, like it'll always trust the browser's version of that, even if the server rendered is different, which generally I think is in your favor, but for this use case was causing us a headache.
I use a PH a hook for that.
Yeah,
it's the best way.
Okay.
And does
like
the hook just take does the hook just listen and then send out the default behavior then, or send out a change event, or what is
change
it?
event? Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Is that based off like a library or just something you just handcrafted?
Just use phx hook, and then you can define what you want to get from the JavaScript.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
I have a question I had forgotten about. Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, David put in the chat that just make sure that your version of LiveView is updated, because it does. It's still at a 0 release, and so things can get crazy in a couple of weeks. So.
All right, so I had a question, and this is for the group generally. So we have a thing that is dealing with a large number of elements in a list. So there's like 28,000 or so right now, and a new 1,000 or so come in throughout the course of an hour, maybe. And so we're doing live updates when they come in. We're popping them on the top of the list. I'd really like for them to be ordered, but I'm using the LiveView append and whatever the temporary assigns to actually just dump items at the end of the list so that it's more performant in the browser and whatnot. It doesn't have as much stuff in memory in the socket. But the problem that I run into when I actually did that, which made it plenty performant and nice, and we have a nice infinite scrolling with a hook, and it's great, is I can't seem to get the stuff in the list updating appropriately now when stuff comes in. I assume because it's not in the assigns anymore. I don't really know, but so if you want, I know that I can like append stuff at the bottom when I have my temporary assigns come in, like when I go fetch the next page, and I can shove stuff to the top of it, sort of, but really I'm just re-rendering the thing when I shove stuff to the top of it. Is there a bit of documentation on how not just to do infinite scrolling, which is like in the guides, but how to do infinite scrolling and also deal with all the minutia that you really want to do in the sort of thing where you have infinite scrolling and an updating list? Does anyone know details on that where I just don't know what to do?
Have you looked at LiveBook?
I have looked at LiveBook. I haven't played with it in detail.
Take a look at the way that they render the output. They're using this hyper list. And one of the things that it does, sorry, is it actually will only selectively, stick stuff on the screen. So In other words, it's attempting to reduce the amount of DOM objects that are there. And if I'm not mistaken, that has to have some way of streaming the output back over, the socket to it. So maybe that'd be a good place to look.
I will have a look. Thank you very much. I have a solution that I didn't want to implement because it's hard. So I'm hoping that this is a solution that's not as hard, but basically my solution would involve having a sort of some other process that holds the data in this windowing layer. Anyway, but I like the idea of being able to go look at somebody else's code and take it more than I like thinking real hard about that.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much. So Noesa Perez has a question.
Well, in my experience working with LiveView, when you up your project to production, you need to be careful with the configuration of the URL of the project, because if you're using LiveView, if you don't put the redirection of the URL, you have a loop so the socket never connects. So your LiveView's component is always being rendered in blank, and and the console only says you can establish the connection. So be careful when you try to upload to production, and maybe you have an Nginx to pointing to the Phoenix application, and be careful to pointing that URLs to cross IE.
Sounds like something you've had problems with.
Yeah, the first day we upload to production, they report that this not working, and we spend like 2 hours and seeing where is the problem.
Works on my machine. Cool. That reminds me, just since you mentioned URLs, totally different, but Phoenix does have the push state, an API for push state. So if you wanted to change URLs like a fancy SPA, it's really easy to do inside of LiveView. I did not show it, partially because it's not something that I do frequently, but it's available.
I saw a website one time that used push state to render a game in the URL that you could control with the keyboard. And now that you've mentioned that, I find myself wanting to play with that because it sounds better than the stuff I do for work.
I would think you could probably server generate the new like template, base 64 encode it, and push that to the push state constantly at 30 frames per second.
Well, this was a text-based game where the text and the screen was the URL. Anyway.
Well, cool.
Wildly unnecessary, which is the sort of thing I prefer.
That's what we all
But
do.
you can run into an issue where the URL is too large. We actually have that with one of our apps right now. Like we hold a lot of state in the URL, and it can get out of hand. But anyway, the other note I wanted to, somebody mentioned production and reminded me, because we have, like, if you deploy and you've got all these long-lived connections with clients, it's been a concern of ours, like for deployment, meaning like when we hit deploy, like we don't want to just like cut off all those connections at once and have them like reconnect. And there's some concerns like in our deployment process for understanding, like when we stand up new versions of the app, like we want to gradually send over the new connections to the new version of the app, but let the old ones live for like as long as they can, and then only cut them off like when we have to. It was really good stuff. That it actually came up in the book. I think it's called Real Time Elixir or something. Real Time
Phoenix.
Real Time Phoenix, I guess. Yeah, Real Time Phoenix. Yeah, that's a good book because I enjoyed it because it went over like the lower levels of sockets and channels, which I didn't really have an appreciation for at the time. Anyway, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I worked on a project for this video, a company that did a bunch of stuff with video, and they had a bunch of the video servers behind HA proxy. And so like the old ones for the old deployment would stick around but not get new connections, and they wouldn't be fronted by the HA or wouldn't be routed to by the HA proxy anymore, but they would stick around up until they drained and then they'd go away. So that's neat. I have not done that with the LiveView, but now I feel like I want to have that as a problem.
I put a link to this library that we use at work called Socket Drano. And but yeah, it's kind of made for, I think it's made for cases like this where you want to start pulling out socket connections on shutdown. So I don't know, guy I work with wrote it.
Maybe just out of curiosity, how many people are using LiveView at work and like LiveView is their main thing versus like they're using Phoenix or just writing a backend Elixir thing? A lot more than this time last year.
I don't know how to raise my hand, but yes.
Yeah. No more JavaScript. Sunday, you are at Smart Logic. Are you doing a lot of LiveView stuff? Or are you still using React stuff over there?
We are not doing LiveView yet. Got some naysayers. I'm going to as many LiveView things as possible. I'm not going to out the naysayers. I'm certainly not going to tell you, Todd, that you're friends with some of them.
Eric?
I said nothing. But in any case,
wow.
So I'm just trying to go to as many LiveView talks as I can. You got the conference sticker, Mike! Yay! Yeah, so I'm trying to go to as many LiveView talks as I can to amass the amount of knowledge that I need to convince the naysayers.
Well, we at SimpleBet have been using it in production for 1.5 years. So if that's any validation that it's a viable technology.
I think there's validation out there. I think maybe, oh man, I can never speak to this question, but maybe a question is like, we were talking about forms and then Mike briefly mentioned stuff when the server goes down or something. I think naysayer number one might have found an issue with LiveView where like if the server went down and you had like a complicated form, the entire thing would disappear or something. I could be describing this completely wrong. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I don't know. There's probably some use cases when even Chris McCord or the LiveView team would say, that's not a good use case for LiveView. But I feel like there's a lot that are a good use case for LiveView.
Yeah,
some people like
particularly
writing,
like when you're trying to do modals in Phoenix and you can't. Sorry. That was
yeah,
like 2 months of my life.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. if you put the -- live, it builds you a modal component already.
I know.
Somebody was asking for the repo for this project, so I'm gonna try to find it, put it in the link or put it in the chat. So
every time back when I was a consultant, every time somebody asked me to build a modal, I just told them no. I was not gonna do it. But
your users really need this.
Yeah,
just tell them modals are aggressive against the user, so no.
Well, that was basically what I said. It was like, yeah, user, think of your mobile users. Think of all of the different screens that people are using this for. Like modals are built for desktops primarily. Like we don't need to do that. There's a different design that we can get here, I think.
It's not popular, but like 4 years ago, we used jQuery to get modals in our Phoenix rendered app. So it's possible, but it's not comfortable.
4 years ago. I'm not saying that was one of my solutions a month ago or anything.
All right. Are there any other questions and or comments? Does anyone want to tell Todd he's very nice? Oh, Misael Perez wants to tell you you're very nice, or that was just conveniently timed.
I don't know if you guys have experience using the pedal stack.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's great.
Yes.
I've been using pedal. Yeah.
Okay. Do you recommend it against using simple JavaScript interaction?
I've been, one of my examples I showed today had the date picker used Alpine JS. It's just like Tailwind, but for JavaScript stuff, you know, and I guess I should probably just not skip over what is the amazing thing that is Tailwind, but really easy declarative stuff. I think my only problem with Alpine JS is there's not a whole lot of examples. Like there's not a lot of material online showing you how to do things. So even things that you're like, I know other people want to do this. Why isn't there an example for that? There just isn't one yet. But yeah, I've been using pedal stack for, I don't know, a few months now, since Patrick Thompson coined the phrase. But it's been really cool. I take it you've been using it too, Misael?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
You use it in production?
We're using it in production at SimpleBet, yeah.
Nice.
I like Tailwind a lot. And I don't even like utility-based CSS, but Tailwind is pleasant.
One thing that makes Tailwind so nice is the documentation is so searchable. I think if it wasn't for that, I don't know if I'd like it as much. But it's like, oh, I just think of the keyword of what I want to do, and search is nice and fast and shows you how to do it. So.
Also, Tailwind UI is beautiful in its simplicity, and I really appreciate it. And I like those people. And if you haven't seen it, Tailwind UI is like a component library of sorts for Tailwind, where you can just get a whole bunch of example HTML and suggestions on the JavaScript to make things that look really nice without a lot of effort. All right, is there anything else? If there's not, we will wrap up and I'll leave it open for broad discussion, but I will probably jet as I have to drive somewhere now. Very good. So I'm going to turn off the recording. Thanks very much, Todd, for coming. And anybody that wants to continue,